regions, thinking of France, Burgundy in particular, people have very open opinions about, blending and whether it should be allowed and, if it is blended or not. And I always raise the question that what's the real definition of blending? Is it blending areas? Is it blending varietals, vintages? Or is it merely just making a barrel selection and putting different barrels together? Does that not count as blending? Because at the end of the day, like Francois mentioned, you're making different batches of wine. If you put it into different barrels and make a barrel selection, it might still be from the same vineyard, it might still be the same varietal, but then at the end of the day, you're putting different batches of barrels together. So I'm going to leave that an open question for you to think out when you go home. This is just what our manor house looks like at Nederburg. That's some of our vineyards. I've just put some slides up there so that you can see what we do and what it looks like. But really, like the slide behind me says, innovation is what we're all about. Just a bit of background on the property, or the properties. We have 6 of our own farms one of them farm exclusively organic and fair trade, so it's something that's very high up on our priority list. And then we have 25 external farms where we have producers that produce exclusively certain varieties and certain styles of grapes for us that we then select. We have the privilege of working with 35 different varietals every year. 21 to 22 red varietals and 15, sometimes 16 white varietals. So the name of the game at Nederburg is definitely, on an experimental, not on an experimental scale, but we really thrive on doing experiments on a year-to-year basis, seeing which new blends we can come up with. We experiment with different varieties in different regions. We have the advantage of having our own nursery and currently working with Spanish, Italian varieties to see just, in which areas they will suit us and the styles of wine that we think we want to take the brand into the future, into the next 5 to 10, 15 years. So just in terms of what we do, we innovate in the vineyard, we innovate in the cellar. I've mentioned the nursery. What else we do in the vineyard? We've started using, just as an example, we've started using a system called Smart Dyson. Some of you might know it. It's just one of the ways that we try and get more fruit into our wines. So to create more fruit style wines or fruit driven wines instead of boring old world, dominated by wood style of wines. And a system like that has really given us the opportunity to get more exposure into the foliage, but also it enables us to actually increase our yield. So it just brings more balance of fruit forward. I've mentioned that we use quite a number of varietals just in the cellar. That's what our barrel cellar looks like. This year we've experimented. We've crushed some of our white grapes and we've treated them as red grapes. So we've done punch downs, we've done pump overs and things like that on white grapes, which is quite bizarre, but the results are astonishing. And then the question was asked on maceration. We do, on some of our grapes, we do 2 months extended maceration on the red grapes. Again, just things that we're playing around with, different areas, just to see how the grapes react. On those grapes we use microoxygenation just to help with the tannins and the complexation, to make sure that the color stabilizes. So those are all the sort of things that we look at. On oaking, we use 4 different origins of oak, starting with French, American, Romanian and Hungarian. 5 different sizes of wood. Your small barrique 2 to 5 liters, we use 300 liters, 500 liters, 2,500 liters, and also 6,000 liter vats. The reason for that simply is we want to see how different varieties from different areas react to different sizes of barrel. And once again, from year to year it changes, but the results that we find are astonishing. And it does help us to create wines that are interesting. It does help us to create wines that brings pleasure to the consumer. When we do the tasting, it's wines that really, you can't taste the wine and put your finger on it. It's really wines that sort of prickle your brain, and you've got to go back to try and figure it out. So that's what we want for you to do. So with any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our 2 wines today. It's our Ingenuity range. The white Ingenuity White is vintage 2009. It's a blend of 8 white varietals. So if you're scribbling down, The four base varietals are Sauvignon Blanc, Chenin Blanc, Chardonnay, and Semillon, of which two of those are wooded. The Sauvignon Blanc goes into first full barrels for about 10 months. The Chardonnay also goes into first full barrels for also more or less the same time. And then the Chenin Blanc, we put in 500 litre barrels that are second and third full, just to add a bit of complexity. Funny enough, the Semillon is unwooded. Then the other four varietals that we use in this blend are Novelle, which is a South African variety, and then a dash of Riesling, Viognier, and Gewürztraminer, just to make the aromatics a little bit more interesting. Basically, so 30% of the blend is wooded, 70% is unwooded. Spends the 10 months in stainless steel while the other wines are in barrel. And then after that time, we take it out, we assemble the blend. It spends about another 4 to 5 months in a stainless steel tank before it gets bottled, just so that we can make sure that the varieties react the way we want them to. And really what we're trying to create is something that sort of is really out of the ordinary. I think what is really impressive about this wine is that there are abundant layers of flavors and aromas that come to the fore. We always tell people that if you serve the wine while chilled, the Sauvignon Blanc component stands up quite strongly. If you serve the wine a little bit more, say, European room temperature, the wine does develop in the sort of oak components and the sort of more the oily and buttery characters stand up. It's definitely a very good food wine. Again, the abundance of aromas and flavors and the good aromatics on the wine helps with that. And I think also on the palate itself, there's crisp, clean acidity, very good minerality on the back of the palate, and definitely a lingering aftertaste. So I think it's really, like I mentioned, a very good food wine, but if you serve it well chilled, definitely a wine that you can drink by itself. Any questions before I move over to the red wine?
There's so many wines in the blend. How do you decide from each vintage to vintage what you want?
That's a good question. What we do with Ingenuity is we've selected a style that we want to create, and that the wine must embody finesse, elegance. It must be a stylish wine, and it must be a wine that really, it must be a wine that if the consumer tastes the wine, it must be something that makes you think. So stylistically, there's a blueprint, and then within the vintage, because I mentioned the 8 varieties. Every year it's 8 varieties, but between there are 7, or 8, or 9, and we've recently assembled there are 10. Some of the varieties change. So the 4 base varieties will always be the same, but I think with the 2008 vintage, 1 or 2 of the varietals changed for the simple reason that stylistically in that vintage it didn't add up to what we wanted to do. So we have the possibility to change as we want, because the main thing is to remain true to the blueprint of what the Ingenuity blend must look like.
How many wines besides this in your white portfolio do you make? Do you make all of these wines separately?
Yeah, in our portfolio, it's a good question. We produce, we obviously one of the bigger facilities in South Africa. Annual production in the cellar itself is 15 million bottles. But we have the facility, we've got a small boutique cellar within the bigger cellar, where we create these 2 wines, where we create wines for our own auction that we have on an annual basis. And annual, say, number of wines can be anything between 45 and 55 different wines, of which I would say probably a fair split would be 50-50 between white and red. I mean, just to give you an indication, our biggest blend would be a red blend, sort of entry-level wine, which the blend is about, say, I'm trying to calculate in bottles, would be, say, between 3 and 3.5 million bottles for one blend, and then the smaller wines like these would be, say, 2,000 bottles. So we go from the wine side of the spectrum to the other side of the spectrum. And in that boutique cellar, we create, I would say, between 10 and 15 wines like this. And then also, part of our experimental program, we have probably about 5 or 6 blends that look similar to this, but that haven't been released yet. Yes, sir.
Speak about, you mentioned Novelle.
Yes. It's been a bit of a contentious issue between Neil and myself, because we've been trying to just nail the crossing. But I think it's safe to say that it's a blend between, and I don't know, Kevin, you might help us out here, but it's a blend between Uni Blanc and Semillon. Is that right? Yeah.
Where did it originate?
So it's South African crossing. I guess Stellenbosch University, they do most of the crossings. Yeah. There's a question.
You mentioned that you've experimented with doing some red fermentation elements on white varietals.
Yeah, that's right.
Which varietals are those, and have any of them been, the result been interesting enough to
Yeah.
bottle and release?
Yeah, we've tried it on Spanish varieties. We had one situation where we had, say, about 5 tons of grapes that we put in an open fermenter, and we allowed the fermentation to take place like a red variety. We punched it down right in the beginning, I think for the first 2 or 3 days, and then we left it completely. So it formed a cap, and fermentation continued under the cap, and then right at the ending, right after the fermentation, we punched the cap down 1 or 2 more times, and then basically pressed it. And the wine is now in barrel, and the aromatics of the wine is very, very interesting. A lot of people would think that it's very oxidative, but as a matter of fact, it's not, because of the fermentation that happened under the cap. So it was completely protected by its own carbon dioxide. And yeah, the wine is now in one of those 6,000 liter vats, and we're going to leave it for probably another, I would say, 6 to 7 months before we look at it. Something else that we did.
Is the vat open or closed?
No, it's closed. So it's completely closed. And then yeah, there's an area in South Africa, or a region called the Swartland, where they do a lot of funny things like this as well. And one of the things that we are doing or experimenting is doing sort of a carbonic maceration with Chenin Blanc. And when I left, the grapes were still in the tank. So that's 7 months down the line, 6 months down the line. The grapes are still fermenting. Yeah, we do crazy things, but the nice thing is that we've got the capacity to do that.
Yeah, sure.
So it makes a big difference.
So did you take any inspiration from the kind of orange wine movement of northern Italy, where they're doing a lot with white varietals?
I think
really, macerating them, leaving them on the skins for extended periods and things like that.
Well, within our winemaking team, I'm one of 3 winemakers, or we're actually 5, and all of us have this thing to innovate and to experiment. And so if somebody reads something, we sit down, we talk about it, we discuss, we say, how do we want to do this, and then the next vintage we do an experiment. We probably do between 6 and 10 different experiments every year, like full-scale scientific, in a scientific matter, to make sure that it's not just a sort of a in-house experiment, but it's actually something that can make sense at the end of the day. And yeah, I'm mostly, I'm responsible for the reds. Tarero, who's the man responsible for the white wines. Yeah, I think it's just one of his, or a couple of his ideas that he's running with at the moment. So to answer where he gets his inspiration from for ideas will be difficult. Yeah. Okay. Quickly, just the Ingenuity Red 2008. Interesting blend of 3 varieties only, all Italian. It's a 45% Sangiovese, 45% Barbera, and 10% Nebbiolo blend. Grapes sourced from 3 distinctly different areas. The reason for that is, like Francois mentioned, the backbone in terms of aromatics comes from the Sangiovese. The Barbera really giving it the acidity and the structure that we wanted, especially to age the wine. And then Nebbiolo really just to polish, bring a little bit of red cherry, red fruit to the blend itself. The wine ages only in second full barrels. It's all Romanian oak that we use for this particular blend. In 2008, 2009, and 2010, we experimented with some other components. But for 2008, it was only Romanian oak, 500 liter barrels. For the first year, the 3 varieties age separately. Then we do a barrel selection. We select the components or the barrels that we think are good enough to go into the blend. In terms of just the blueprint of what we want the blend to look like. And then right at the end, after that year, we take the wine out, we make up the blend, and then we put it back into the same barrels for another year and a half. The wine itself, again, like the white, it's one of those wines that we want to create. We want to stimulate the consumer to really go back glass after glass. It's just an infusion of flavors, a lot of sweet spice, cinnamon, nutmeg, those sort of flavors. The Sangiovese definitely brings a little bit of lead pencil to the blend and dark fruit, and like I've mentioned, the Nebbiolo bringing some of the sweeter fruit to the blend. And what's nice about this blend is that it's 2008. The wine now probably drinks easy, it's seamless, not a lot of harsh tannin, but you'll be surprised to know that it has a alcohol percentage of 15. So it's a big wine, but you will never say that. And with that said, it's also a wine that we know will age well. It has a capacity to age for probably another 6 to 9 years, but funny enough, it's a wine that it presents itself as seamless right for drinking now. So yeah, that's all from my side. Any questions?
Good job.
Thank you.